Hello and welcome to Global News Desk, where we bring you the day's top stories from across the world. I am Gushin Galan, live from the First Force studios. Let's begin with the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulates Hungary's Peter Maria for his resounding election victory hours after his party won the country's sports that voted out longtime leader Viktor Orban. Lebanon's Prime Minister Nav Salam says he is working to ensure the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the country. This comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited IDF troops in southern Lebanon. Pistachio prices surged by 30%, pushing the popular nuts rate to an 8-year high due to U.S.-Israeli war or Iran. South Korean president hosts Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Seoul as the two countries agree to upgrade their ties to the level of comprehensive strategic partnership. And Australia gets its first woman army chief. Lieutenant General Susan Coyle will lead the military following a 3-decades career during which she survived in Afghanistan and West Asia. The U.S.-Israeli war on Iran continues to get bigger. President Trump is now warning other countries against supporting Iran or pay a heavy price. His threat is direct. Any country that supplies weapons to Iran will face a 50% tariff on everything they export to the United States. No exceptions, no escape. That warning now has a name: China. Trump has made it clear this threat is aimed squarely at China. He says if Beijing helps Iran militarily, there will be problems. But what kind of problems? Trump doesn't say is preparing to stick to Iran. Well, if China does that, China's going to have big problems. Okay, Mr. President, why China is in Trump's crosshairs? Intelligence reports suggest that Beijing may be preparing to send advanced weapons to Iran, including portable missile systems, that can now shoot down low-flying aircraft, the kind that could target U.S. military planes. Reports say these shipments could even be routed through other countries to hide where they are coming from. China, however, has denied all of this. China firmly opposes the United States' practice of generalizing the concept of national security. This kind of practice seriously impedes normal economic and trade exchanges between Chinese and U.S. enterprises and is not in the interests of all parties, including U.S. enterprises and consumers. China will continue to firmly safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. Trump's warning against China comes right after talks between the U.S. and Iran ended with no deal. Trump says Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that was a deal breaker. So what does this mean for the world? It means this conflict is spreading from a regional war to a global power struggle. On one side, the United States, on the other, Iran, and now potentially China, the world's second largest economy. And then there's more at stake than just military power. If these tariffs threat become real, global trade could take a massive hit. Prices could rise, supply chains could break, and economies far from the war zone could still feel the pain. Finally, there's no longer just about Iran or even the United States. The lines are widening, the stakes are rising as Trump directs American economics SW towards China. The world's top economic watchdog is sounding the alarm. The International Monetary Fund is warning that any knee-jerk or unilateral economic moves could make an already fragile situation worse. The IMF says countries need to act with caution and not escalation, because the impact of the crisis won't just be felt by major powers, but also by the most vulnerable economies, especially those far removed from the conflict. So I appeal to all countries to reject go-it-alone actions, export controls, price controls, and so on that can further upset global conditions. Don't pour gasoline on the fire. And with global powers now hovering over the edge, the conflict is one escalation away from drawing in countries far beyond Iran's neighborhood. Tensions in the Gulf are far from over, even as a fragile ceasefire is in place between Iran and the U.S. In a strong diplomatic move, Saudi Arabia has summoned Iraq's ambassador. The kingdom has lodged a formal protest over attacks that it says originated from Iraqi territory. The Saudi Foreign Ministry has condemned these strikes. The Foreign Ministry summons the ambassador of the Republic of Iraq to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Safia al-Shel, in response to the continued attacks and blatant threats against the kingdom and the brotherly Gulf states through drones launched from Iraqi territory. I tracked the T for white Saudi has called these attacks a direct threat, not just to the kingdom, but to the entire Gulf region. And this marks one of the first official signals from the region that some of the attacks may have been launched from within Iraq. Now, during the hostilities involving Iran, the U.S., and Israel, Iraq has found itself caught in the crossfires. Besides several key oil sites, U.S. interests in West Asia, including its embassy in Baghdad, were targeted multiple times. At the same time, pro-Indian armed forces operating in Iraq claimed responsibility for repeated attacks on what they called enemy bases across the region. However, these groups announced a suspension of operations after a ceasefire between Iran and the United States was declared. But even as the guns fall silent, the aftershocks of the conflict continue to play out. Saudi Arabia had claimed that its critical energy infrastructure was targeted during the escalation. The kingdom now says its east-west oil pipeline and other facilities which suffered attack damage have now been restored and are back to full operational capacity. This pipeline is a vital artery for global energy supplies capable of transporting approximately 7 million barrels of oil per day. Earlier attacks had forced a reduction of about 700,000 barrels per day, highlighting the scale of the damage. Energy facilities and east-west pipeline affected by the attacks have recovered and restored operational capacity, enhancing supply reliability. These attacks also took a human toll. Last month, at least 3 people were killed in Saudi Arabia following strikes. One of the strikes even hit a pumping station along the crucial pipeline network. The kingdom's foreign ministry has denounced the aggression from Iran and its proxy group since the West Asia crisis began. The foreign ministry expresses the kingdom of Saudi Arabia's strong condemnation and denunciation of the heinous attacks targeting a number of vital facilities in the brotherly state of Kuwait carried out by Iran, its proxies and affiliated groups. While military action may have been paused for now, but diplomatic and strategic tensions are still very much alive. And with Islamabad talks being unsuccessful, many are asking, is the region simply preparing for the next round of escalation? President Trump has issued one of his most dramatic warnings yet, announcing a full-scale naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. This comes hours after U.S.-Iran peace talks in Islamabad collapsed, with Washington accusing Tehran of refusing to abandon its nuclear program. After 40 days of war that began with U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, Trump is now accusing Tehran of disrupting global trade. The U.S. president has warned that any vessel linked to Iran will be stopped by U.S. Navy, and any Iranian attack will be met with overwhelming force. By the 10 tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. Other nations are working so that Iran will not be able to sell oil. What we notice and what we see and what I think is maybe my idea, maybe not. I don't know, but there are many boats heading toward our country to fill up with oil and then go and take it. So they're not going to go through the Hormuz Strait. And ultimately that'll be correct. Tehran has rejected Washington's move as aggression, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accusing the U.S. of shifting goalposts. Iran says the U.S. is undermining diplomacy with threats of a blockade. On the ground, the Iranian response is both dismissive and deadly serious. Iran's Navy chief has dismissed Trump's blockade threat, calling it ridiculous and funny. But that public mockery is backed by a hard warning. Iran says any attempt to control or block the strait is doomed to fail. The Revolutionary Guards have also signaled that any foreign force entering the strait under hostile conditions could be caught in what they call a deadly vortex. The United States, just as it suffered a historic defeat against Iran in attempting to open the Strait of Hormuz, is also doomed to fail in any naval blockade. Iran is not a place that can be contained with tweets and imaginary blockade plans. On the streets of Tehran, Iranian citizens are also making it clear that they support all efforts of retaliation if their country is attacked. Regarding the negotiations, we knew from the beginning that the other side are not the type of people that you can negotiate anything. Thank God it did not go anywhere, because the Americans were seeking to violate our territorial integrity, and we are not going to allow this. I was really hoping they would make an agreement and reach a conclusion. This is not a good situation for the country. This is not what our country deserves. Meanwhile, the markets are reacting sharply to no end of Iran-U.S. hostilities. Oil prices have surged, spiking nearly 8%, with crude oil going beyond $104 a barrel mark. Global stocks are sliding from Tokyo to Hong Kong as investors fear a prolonged conflict in West Asia. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil passes, is now at the center of a new geopolitical storm. And with trust between Washington and Tehran collapsing, fears of a wider war are back on the table. A decree by tensions between the United States and Iran have sharply escalated after stalled negotiations in Islamabad, with both sides exchanging warnings. Donald Trump struck a hardline tone following the breakdown of talks, expressing confidence that Iran would eventually concede to Washington's demands. He suggested that Iran lacks leverage and would be compelled to return to negotiations on U.S. terms. In an interview to a media outlet, Donald Trump issued stark military warnings, stating that the United States could swiftly Iran's critical infrastructure, including its energy and power systems if required, with damage that could take years for the Iran to recover from. Despite the aggressive rhetoric, Trump described the Islamabad talks as very friendly and maintained that Iran would likely return to the table, though he later added he was indifferent if it chose not to. I think Iran is in very bad shape. I think they're very desperate. We had a meeting that lasted 21 hours. We understand the situation better than anybody. And Iran's in very bad shape. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. We will not have. There is no way that they're going to get. They still want it? And they made that clear the other night. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance reinforced Washington's stance, stating that while some progress was made, Iran ultimately refused to accept U.S. conditions, particularly around nuclear restrictions leading to the deadlock. Iran responded with defiance, rejecting U.S. pressure and warning against any escalation. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghaliba said Tehran would neither bow to threats nor abandon its position, making it clear that any confrontation would be met with a proportional response. Foreign Minister Abbasari said Iran had negotiated in good faith and was close to a deal, but accused the U.S. of shifting demands at the last moment. He described the negotiation as being inches away from an agreement before collapsing. Iran also rejected key U.S. demands, including ending uranium re-enrichment, curbing regional alliances, and altering its position on the Strait of Hormuz issues that remain central sticking points. According to Iranian state media, following a phone call with Vladimir Putin, President Masoud Pezeshkian signals conditional openness to a deal, stating that an agreement remains within reach provided the United States respects Iran's rights and adheres to international legal frameworks. The 21-hour negotiations in Islamabad ended without agreement despite some convergence on secondary issues. The primary dispute centered on Iran's nuclear program and control over strategic waterways, while the U.S. pushed for sweeping restrictions. Iran viewed these as excessive and inconsistent, accusing Washington of moving the goalposts. Iranian officials described the process as part of a longer diplomatic track rather than a one-off failure, indicating that back-channel engagement may continue. Wanting by KT. The tensions come amid ongoing instability in West Asia, including Israel-Hezbollah clashes in Lebanon and broader geopolitical friction involving Iran-backed groups. Despite the sharp escalation in rhetoric, both sides have left the door slightly open for future engagement. However, with core disagreements unresolved and military warnings intensifying, the path ahead remains uncertain and volatile. Moving on to our next story. In a sharp escalation of rhetoric, Trump has now turned his focus towards the church, launching a strong attack on Pope Leo XIV. Trump delivered a strong rebuke, saying he is not a fan of Pope Leo and accusing him of being weak on crime and ineffective on foreign policy. He also described the pontiff as overly liberal and criticized his approach to global conflicts. We don't like a pope that's going to say that it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want a pope that says crime is okay in our cities. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. The U.S. president also took issue with Pope's remarks on Iran, insisting that he does not support any leader who appears to tolerate Iran having nuclear weapons. He reiterated Washington's firm stance against Tehran acquiring such capabilities. Trump went further, arguing that his decisions reflect the mandate given by American voters, while strongly pushing back against criticism from the Vatican, making it clear he does not accept a pope questioning U.S. policy or leadership. I don't want a pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I don't want a pope who thinks it's terrible that America attacked Venezuela, a country that was sending massive amounts of drugs into the United States and even worse, emptying their prisons, including murderers, drug dealers, and killers, into our country. And I don't want a pope who criticizes the president of the United States because I'm doing exactly what I was elected to do. In an unusually personal attack, Trump suggested that Pope Leo's elevation was influenced by his American identity and claimed it was intended to counter his presidency. He wasn't on any list to be pope and was only put there by the church because he was an American. And they thought that would be the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump. If I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. Unfortunately, Leo's weak on crime, weak on nuclear weapons does not sit well with me. Nor does the fact that he meets with Obama sympathizers like David Axelrod, a loser from the left, who is one of those who wanted churchgoers and clerics to be arrested. Trump later amplified his remarks on social media, repeating his criticism and calling on the Pope to focus on religious leaderships rather than politics. Continuing a trend, Trump shared another AI-generated image on Truth Social depicting himself as a Christ-like figure healing a person, depicting a symbolic, almost divine persona. The criticism followed the Pope's recent comments against war rhetoric and what he described as dangerous narratives around the Iran conflict, emphasizing peace and rejecting religious justifications for war. I received many letters from children in areas of conflict. In reading them, one perceives through the truth of innocence all the horror and inhumanity of actions that some adults brag about with pride. Let's listen to the voice of children. Enough of the idolatry of self and money. Enough of the display of power. Enough of war. True strength is shown in serving life. May the madness of war cease and the earth be cared for and cultivated by those who still know how to create, safeguard, and love life. Hear us, Lord of Life. Earlier, Pope Leo XIV had also criticized Donald Trump's threats against Iran, calling such rhetoric unacceptable, even as he welcomed a temporary ceasefire and urged a return to dialogue and peace. Meanwhile, the comments come as Pope Leo arrives in Algeria's making, marking the start of his 11-day visit to Africa, his first trip to the continent as pontiff. In a major political upset, Viktor Orban, a key ally of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, has lost power in Hungary after 16 years. Orban, who built his image as a champion of illiberal democracy, was widely backed by conservative leaders across the West. Conceding defeat, Orban called the result painful but unambiguous and confirmed he had congratulated his opponent. The election result is painful for us, but clear. The responsibility and possibility of governing was not given to us. I have congratulated the winner. I thank you all for the great work. Never before in any election campaign have so many of us worked together and worked so much you can see it. We managed to gather 2.5 million voters. 2 million people trusted us today as well. Now, this result is being seen as a significant setback, not just for Urban, but also for his global allies, including Donald Trump, who had publicly backed him. Opposition leader Peter Maga had declared victory with his TISA party, claiming a landslide win in Sunday's national election. This marks the end of Orban's long and controversial rule and a turning point for Hungary's political future. Reports suggest that Magyar's party won a commanding majority in Hungary's 199-seat parliament, securing more than 2/3 of the seats. Dear compatriots Hungarians, we did it. TISA and Hungary won this election. Not a little, but a lot. Actually, very, very much. Peter Mara, a 45-year-old political newcomer and former government insider, built his campaign around anti-corruption, better governance, and stronger public services. I know it's difficult, but I hear today, Peter Maguire, promise you that I will also be your prime minister. I will be the prime minister of all Hungarian people, and I will work 24 hours a day, every day of the week, to heal the wounds so that we can accept each other, even if we have different political views. I will represent you too. Voter turnout hit record levels underlining the high stakes of this election. Reports suggest voter turnout was a record of 79% or more. Many Hungarians saw this election as a watershed moment for the country. In the capital, Budapest, MA supporters celebrated in large numbers, expressing hope for a new beginning. Supporters of Peter Ma say the result is a moment of hope and change, calling it a clear mandate from voters to rebuild Hungary's future. I think this nation woke up and we try to rebuild all the relationship in our families, because this is the most important thing, the loving kindness, and to believe in the future. And this nation, one of the best nations in Europe, and we can change also other nations to wake up. Meanwhile, Orban's supporters gathered in a more subdued atmosphere, still backing his hardline positions on national sovereignty and his criticism of European Union. For years, Orban was viewed as a reliable pro-Russia voice inside both the European Union and NATO, but waters now appear to be turning away from that approach. Experts suggest that Hungary now appears set to move closer to Brussels, signaling a shift away from Orban's nationalist far-right politics towards a more liberal path. For now, one thing is clear. After 16 years, one of Europe's most dominant and polarizing leaders has been voted out, marking the end of an era in Hungarian politics. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us. I am Goshen Galan, and we'll see you right back here at First Post Live at 3 with more updates. Until then, stay informed and stay tuned to First Post. The world moves fast, power shifts, unexpected developments, changing alliances. Every day brings a new headline. But headlines are only the beginning, because behind every story, there is context. There are consequences and there are questions worth asking. Find the answers. Understand the story. Take on the world. Thanks for the watching.